And we are here. Good morning, good evening, all of my darlings of various shapes and sorts and sizes. Lovely to see you all. Pleasure to have you with me. And good to be back. I have several people that I am concerned or worrying about. Nothing too frighteningly dangerous at the moment, just various friends and loved ones in either in the hospital, in rehab. One of them is sitting waiting for her partner in the parking lot of the urgent care. As far as I know, everybody is doing pretty okay. Nobody is in serious immediate danger. Just a confluence of happenings. So I want to send some good energy out to all of them because they're all dear to me. But in the interest of privacy, I'm not going to mention names, but various friends and family members all struggling with different things tonight. So sending my best wishes to them. And of course, sending my best wishes to all of you as well. Lovely to have you with me. I was just as I was putting something up on just now, I was putting the URL information up on Twitter. And the first thing I saw was somebody had posted something that said basically, want to change your life? Have you considered being carried off by an owl? OWL, owl. No, I can't find it. But that was definitely, I went like, yeah, that sounds like a plan. That's a way to deal with stress. Just get carried off by an owl. This, of course, is a subject that is not completely foreign to considerations because, as many of you know, we sort of live in the woods. I mean, we're, like 2 miles outside of town. So it's not like we're in the depths of the Der Schwarzwald or Das Schwarzwald. Anyway, we're not in the depths of anything, but we do live in a nice little pocket of redwoods and other trees and things like that. And we have a lot of raptors on the property. One of the things that Deb and I like to do at night, I mean, we see them in the daytime sometimes, mostly the hawks. And at evening, we will occasionally see the owls, but mostly we hear the owls. But we also have a 4-pound Chihuahua, and who is just a mite too big to be carried off by one of the small hawks that we have around here. But a good-sized owl, and we have great horned owls and barn owls, which are pretty decent-sized, especially great horned owls. That's an actual concern sometimes. So, I don't tend to let the small dog out at night without me and the big dog to act as owl deterrents. So I don't know why I'm telling you all this, except I just saw this thing that said, need a change in your life, consider being carried off by an owl. And the fact that all these people that I'm worrying about meant it actually, it struck me as like, yeah, at this moment, I wouldn't mind being carried off by an owl just for an hour or two. I'm probably too big to actually be fed to any owlets, baby owls. Anyway, so what else is there to talk about? Just another hard-working week for everybody in the household, doing all kinds of stuff. I'm actually in a little tiny mini quagmire, whatever one would call that, a quagmire. Oh, good. And there's my mother-in-law, Hazel, who's one of the people who's been ill, who checked in to say, hi, darling, all okay over here. And I'm so glad to hear that, Hazel. We've got various other sundry loved ones sick as well. So, and there is my sister-in-law as well. Hello, Lisa, sweetie. So good to see you both. Hazel, I'm glad you're feeling better, or it sounds like you are anyway. So what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So I'm in this kind of mini quagmire because I've just finished the penultimate climax, I guess we could say, which, was one of these things I've been working toward for 6-7 years now, at least, since I knew more or less what was going to happen. And what I just suddenly realized when I finished that section is that I had no idea what was going to happen immediately afterward when I have to bring all these characters together and have them start communicating with each other, because they're all in the same place, but they haven't had an opportunity to meet up. Some of them have never met each other before. There's various other things that are going to be happening. And I realized that I had been thinking so much about this particular peak that comes just before where I am at the moment, and then the other peak that comes a little bit further ahead, just almost at the end of the book. So I'm really into the final stages, but I hadn't planned this part out at all. So it's really kind of terra incognita. I just don't know exactly what to do. So I'm having to go through it very carefully, I guess is the short version. I'm having to plug all these disparate bits together, but I don't want it to be simply what we would call in the business an expository lump. This is not a phrase I coined. I believe that the Minneapolis science fiction writer and fantasy writers group that Steve Bruce and Emma Bull and Will Shetterly and Kara Dalkey and others were all part of first coined that phrase, the expository lump, meaning when you have to dump a bunch of information. And if you don't dump it well, it does just kind of lie there like a big lump, and people reading the story get irritated because you're info dumping on them. So I have to manage to make all this work while still keeping some dramatic interest in it and not just having everybody say, oh, here's what I was doing since you last saw me, and here's what we need to do next. That's the basic plan. So I'm kind of, this stuff is like the world's most complex 5-level thumb puzzle anyway, which I think I've expressed before, that I see these things as being a lot like those little tile puzzles, those little square things with the numbers in them, and you've only got one open slot, and you have to move them around with your thumbs, and you have to move in one to move another one, and blah, blah, blah. And putting together one of these very complex stories, like The Last King of Ostenard, which I am now finishing, which has not only this is the 4th volume, but there's the 2 smaller books, which both feed into this last book. And of course, everything established in the first series, plus the Burning Man. I almost forgot about that, that kind of novella-length short story. So altogether, there's, like 2 plus million words worth of stuff that all has to make sense and yet be interesting to read. So I had a big decision. I'm just going to give up. I'm going to run away to sea. I'm going to become a sailor and maybe join the Merchant Marine and leave my book for someone else to finish. Somebody who's clearly got nothing else to do, like George Martin or Pat Rothfuss, who I'm sure would be happy to just pick it up and knock out the last couple of 100 pages or so. Anyway, so that's my decision. So this is my official retirement. And I am going to be shortly carried away by an owl. It might even happen before the end of the broadcast tonight. So keep tuned, those of you who are bird watchers, or what do we call them in England? Twitchers. Twitchers especially will want to watch carefully in case I do actually get carried off by an owl. It may happen on camera so that you can actually identify what kind of an owl it is that carries me off. Anyway, okay, so now what I'm going to do after having wasted a few minutes, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I was going to tell you. We're living this very strange life at the moment with all kinds of things going on. Most of them boring domestic stuff that I wouldn't bother to relate to anybody. Or business-related stuff, and as I said, we've got various family members and friends who are not well, and so I'm concerned about all of them, and we've been dealing with the escaping dog situation, but then the escaping dog situation has been all upended again, because as soon as we got it fixed and he could go in and out freely again, which was just like 2 days ago, then all of the deck painting started to happen all at once they'd gotten it all ready, and now we only have this one little way we could let him out, and he has to go out on a leash again, and it's very complicated. So I've completely lost my mind, is basically what I'm trying to tell you. I've got no brain left. Deb was trying to tell me something important tonight, my beloved wife, and I just kind of had to wave my hand at her, just like, no, not now. Later, tomorrow. Everything will be more or less intact tomorrow, and then I can think. But I have shot all my thinking bullets for the day, and the old gun is empty. I can't do anymore. So that's where I'm at, and not really complaining about it either. I hope it doesn't sound like a complaint. Just that's how life is sometimes. Anyway, all of that said, I am going to go and say hello to the people who have checked in with me today. And who are they? Suzanne is the first on the list. Hello, Suzanne. Good to see you. Ronnie, a pleasure as always. Holger, I hope you are well. I'm glad you are back with us. Wouter, I'm glad that you are back with us too. And halfway through Otherland Part 4. Voucher compliments the net feed pieces. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Basically, what happened at the time when I was writing Otherland was once I had the idea, because so much of the later part of the books take place in virtual space, in these invented worlds, these built worlds, which are anything from the First World War to Alice's Wonderland to all kinds of different places that have been created. But since so much of it took place, whereas a lot of the first book takes place in the real world, I wanted to keep real world elements in the story. And so I started with the first volume doing the net feeds. And the way I was basically doing the net feeds, now mind you, this is back in the early 1990s. I guess I had just moved to England when I was writing these, so about 1992. So basically what I was doing was I was taking actual articles out of the newspaper, because we didn't get all of our news online at that point or on television, although I did use a few of those too, but it was easier just to go through the newspapers, because in those days we still had newspapers delivered to us, or when I was in England, we walked to the corner shop and on the high street and picked them up and brought them back. So I was just taking newspaper stories that struck me as like, that's very much of our time. And then kind of satirizing them, just exaggerating them and projecting them some 50-something years into the future, because as far as I was concerned, Otherland takes place about 20 years from now, roughly, 2040, 2050, around there. And so as a result, I just took these real world newspaper stories about things like the early days of, sort of the very first reality TV shows and what was going on with reality TV in countries like Japan, and just kind of stretched them and made them even more absurd. And, just again, just like writing satire, basically. And then over the years since then, of course, since the Otherland books have come out, people are constantly saying to me, oh, this just happened for real. This is just going on at the moment. You mentioned it 20 years ago or whenever it was, back in the Otherland books, and it just happened. So it is a little scary sometimes that these things that I was creating is essentially sort of jokes, like, well, you think it's bad now, wait till here's the future. And in fact, we have been getting closer to that future every flippin' day. And it's, I wish I hadn't been quite so sarcastic and cynical. Maybe I would have created a better future for us. Anyway, so let me check in. So that's it. So Voter, I'm glad you're enjoying those. And yes, they are, some of them, even to me, are frighteningly more realistic than they were when I wrote them. Petra, hello, great to see you. Anamika, a pleasure as always. Christina, hello, good morning. Who else is here? Debbie, hello, Debbie, good to see you. What else? Hazel, I already said hello to, and she may have gone back to bed, but I'm glad that she says they're all okay, and I hope that means she particularly, that's my mother-in-law, is feeling better, Deb's mom. Who else here? And Lisa, I already said hello to. James, hello. Brother of the Wind. Brothers of the Wind. Good. I am glad you're enjoying it. Tana's tantalizingly applicable to real world issues. Well, that's kind of the thing with fantasy. If you're not writing fantasy, that at some point people don't say, yeah, it kind of feels a little bit like things we're wrestling with in our contemporary society, you're probably not doing it right. You're probably not upset and angry with how human beings continue to try to screw themselves up. As I always, it's like the Hulk line, the secret is I'm always angry. And, that's essentially, that's the fire that's lit underneath satire anyway. is very little of it is just pure ha ha ha, let's tell a joke. Most satirists are bitter, angry people who are trying to explain to the rest of the world why they can see this and wondering why other people can't and won't do anything about it. So that's where satire is. And so, that stuff, I don't deliberately set out to put contemporary stuff in my books. I find that to be, as I always say, if you want to give a lecture, hire a hall. I don't believe in writing polemics. But it is inevitable and almost impossible not to have some of your real life reactions to the world you live in creep into your work. I can't think of a fantasy writer or a science fiction writer whose personality does not come out and their beliefs does not come out in what they write in some shape or form. So it's there for me too. Last quote on that subject is one of the greatest lines of all time. And although this will now be kind of old-fashioned for a lot of you, but I think, since the guy is still alive, they're both still alive as far as I know, both the person talking and the person being talked about, it's not completely in the past yet. Anyway, the line is the wonderful satirical songwriter Tom Lehrer, who's a huge favorite of mine, who wrote, Poisoning Pigeons in the Park and The Old Dope Peddler and, all kinds of wonderful, very funny, very dark songs he was huge in the early 60s, and I was raised with his music. Tom Lehrer was asked when he'd kind of retired. He teaches math and things like that too, so super smart guy. As far as I know, still lives up the road from me, but he was famous all over the world. The album that my mom loved best, he was playing in Australia. Anyway, Tom Lehrer was asked, why have you kind of given up writing satirical songs? And he said, and again, this won't mean quite as much to people who don't remember the world back then, but he said, hey, once Henry Kissinger won the Nobel Peace Prize, I realized satire was dead. And I've always thought, that's such a great line, but it's also such a great line about the satirist, that because of course Henry Kissinger worked with Nixon to vastly expand the Vietnam War and stalled the Vietnam peace talks because Nixon wanted to bomb the crap out of Cambodia and some other places and try and improve the U.S. situation before he would agree to anything at the peace talks. He wanted peace with honor. So we had 3 more years of the war, basically, and a lot of dead people, not as many Americans because it became an air war, but a lot of more dead people in Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos and places like that. And of course, it helped to push Cambodia over the edge into becoming one of the worst dictatorships in history with murders of millions. Anyway, so the idea of Kissinger getting the Nobel Peace Prize led Tom Lehrer to say, I knew satire was dead. And that's what burns inside a satirist. They're people who care deeply. And are constantly appalled by the world in which they find themselves. So anyway, sorry for the long digression, but that's kind of what I do. Who else have I not said hello to? James, I did say, yes, James was one who brought up the applicability of real world issues and Brothers of the Wind. Andre, hello, good morning, good to see you. And have I got everybody else? Matthew, hello, Matthew. What a pleasure to see you. Matthew Dangerously is in the house. And Wouter says that Iris says hi also, but does not seem to appear. So apparently Iris has lost her corporeal presence, and I think we should all have a moment of hoping that she actually manages to be able to materialize again at some point, because it's no fun just floating around like you're in the Phantom Zone, and you can't eat cupcakes. You can't do a lot of things that are really worth doing. Jeremy, hello. Jeremy was distracted by an idea for a novel. Oh, you poor fool. Don't even go down that road. Don't even go down that road. No, go ahead. Write it. I wish you the best. I'm sure if anybody can write a novel who hasn't written a novel yet, it's you, Jeremy. And Mark. Hello, Mark. If I haven't said hello to you already, good to see you. I hope things are good in Yorkshire. So, with that, I have now wasted fully a third of my broadcast time, and I am going to start reading. because that's how we does it. That's how we does it. The last thing I was reading was Simon. Things are going not as well as they had. We found out that since Elias has been king, there's been a drought. The Conqueror's Star, which appeared on the night of Elias's coronation, has not proved to be an augury of good times, at least so far. And Simon, who very much wanted to be a soldier, and was out, wandering around with Jeremias, and they came on a group of essentially regular people, ordinary peasant people outside the castle, and a woman with a child who had starved to death. And Simon, of course, sympathetically wants to go and see if he could be of any help, and the people there do not want them because they are castle folk and are thought to be probably with some truth people who are not suffering as much as the working poor. Anyway, so we just finished that section, and we are now starting a new section. None of the torches were lit, but strange smoky light filled the long hall. He couldn't see a soul stirring anywhere in the hayhold, but down every passageway echoed the sound of voices lifted in song and laughter. Simon moved from one room to another, pulling aside curtains, opening pantry doors, but still could find no one. The voices seemed almost to mock him as he searched, now swelling in volume, now diminishing, chanting and singing in 100 different languages, not one of them his own. At last, he stood before the door of the throne room. The voices were louder than ever, all seeming to cry out from inside the great chamber. He reached a hand down. The door was not locked. As he pushed it open, the voices stilled, as though startled into silence by the creak of the hinges. The misty light poured out past him like shimmering smoke. He stepped inside. The yellowing throne, the Dragonbone chair, stood in the room's center. Around it danced a linked circle of figures, hands clasped, moving as slowly as though they were in deep, deep water. He recognized several: Judith, Rachel, Jacob the Chandler, and other castle folk, their faces stretched with wild merriment as they bowed and capered. Among them moved dancers more grand: King Elias, Guthwulf of Utenate, Gwithin of Hernistir. These, like the castle folk, wheeled as slowly and deliberately as ageless ice grinding mountains down to dust. Scattered about the silent circle were looming figures, shiny black as beetles. The Malachite kings come down from their pedestals to join the sluggish festivity. And, in the middle, bulked the great chair, a skull-peaked mountain of dull ivory that seemed somehow full of vitality, suffused with an ancient energy that held the circling dancers by taut, invisible reins. The throne room was silent, but for a thin thread of melody that wavered in the air, the Cansim Felis, the hymn to joy. The tune was stretched and discomforting, as if the invisible hands that plucked it out were not made to handle earthly instruments. Simon felt himself drawn toward the terrible dance, as to a whirlpool. He dragged his feet, but still moved inexorably inward. The dancers' heads turned toward his approach with a slow, twisting motion like the unwinding of crumpled stems of grass. In the center of the ring, on the Dragonbone chair itself, a darkness was coalescing. A darkness of many flittering parts like a cloud of flies. Near the top of this swarming, rolling dark, 2 smoldering sparks of crimson began to brighten, as though fanned by a sudden breeze. The dancers were staring at him now as they swam by, mouthing his name: Simon, Simon, Simon. On the far side of the ring, beyond the crawling obscurity on the throne, a gap opened. Two clasped hands sliding apart like the tearing of a rotted rag. As the opening moved around to him, one of the hands fluttered out in fish-like undulation. It was Rachel's, and as she neared, she beckoned to him. Instead of her usual look of suspicion, her face was set in lines of desperate cheerfulness. She reached out. Across from her, fat Jeremias held the gap open, a dull smile on his pale features. "Come, boy," Rachel said, or at least it was her lips that moved. The voice, soft and hoarse, was a man's. "Come, can you not feel the place we have left for you? A place especially prepared." The grasping hand caught at his collar and began to pull him into the dance's orbit. He struggled, slapping at the clammy fingers, but his arms were strengthless. Rachel's and Jeremias's lips split in wide grins. The voice deepened. "Boy, don't you hear me? Come on, boy." "No!" The cry came out at last, leaping from the prison of Simon's constricted throat. "No, I won't. No. Oh, Fraser's garters, boy, wake up. You've woken everyone else." The hand shook him again, roughly, and there was a sudden gleam of light. Simon sat up, tried to scream, and fell back in a coughing fit. A dark shape leaned over him, starkly outlined by an oil lamp. "Actually, the boy hasn't really wakened anyone," Grimner realized. "The rest of them have been tossing and moaning since I walked in, like they were all having the same nightmare. What a God's cursed strange night." The Duke watched as the restless shapes around him slowly lapsed back into quietude, then returned his attention to the boy. "Look there. The little puppy is coughing something fierce. Truthfully, though, he's not so little, just thin as a starveling colt." Grimner put the lantern down in a niche, then pulled the sheet of homespun stretched across the alcove to one side so he could get a good grip on the youth's shoulder. He pulled the boy upright in bed and gave him a firm swat on the back. The boy coughed once more and then stopped. Grimner patted him a few more times with a wide, hairy hand. "Sorry, fellow, sorry. Take your time there." While the youth regained his breath, the Duke looked around the curtained-off alcove in which the boy's slat bed was set. From beyond the drooping cloth came the murmuring night sounds of the dozen or so scullions bedded nearby. Grimner picked up the lantern again, peering at the odd shapes pegged on the shadowed wall. An unraveling bird's nest, a silky streamer. It looked green in the poor lamplight. That had probably come from some knight's festival gear. Nearby, also hanging from nails driven into cracks, were a hawk feather, a crude wooden tree, and a picture whose ragged edge showed it to be torn from a book. Squinting, Grimner thought he could make out a staring man with wild hair standing out from his head. Or were they antlers? When he looked down again, smiling to himself at the unholy clutter of younglings, the boy had regained his breath. He was looking up at the Duke with wide, nervous eyes. "With that nose and thatch of, what is it, red hair, the boy looks like a be-damned marsh bird," Grimner thought. "Sorry to startle you," the old Duke said, "but you were closest to the door. I need to speak to Towser, the jester. Do you know who he is?" The boy nodded, watching his face intently. "Good," thought the Rimmersman. "At least he isn't simple-minded. I was told that he dossed down here tonight, but I don't see him. Where is he?" You're... The youth was having trouble coming out with it. "Yes, I'm the Duke of Elvitshire. Don't start in bowing and sirring. Just tell me where the jester is, and I'll let you get back to sleep." Without another word, the boy slid off his pallet and stood up, pulling his blanket free and wrapping it around his shoulders. The hem of his shirt hung down below, flapping against bare legs, as he stepped over the slumbering men around him, some of whom lay wrapped in their cloaks in the middle of the floor, as though they had not been able to make it all the way to their beds. Isgrimner followed with the lamp, stepping carefully over the dark forms, as though he followed one of Udun's ghost maidens through a field of battle slain. They went through 2 more rooms this way, the big spirit and the small, the larger just as silent for all his bulk. In the last room, a few dim coals sparkled in the fireplace. On the bricks before the grate, curled in a nest of coats, and with a sheepskin wine bag still gripped in his horny old fist, Towser the jester lay snoring and mumbling. "Ah," Isgrimner grunted. "Well, thanks then, boy. Go back to your bed with my apologies. Although I think now you were dreaming a dream you'd be just as happy to wake from. Go on now." The youth turned and went back past Isgrimner toward the doorway. As he brushed by, the Duke was mildly surprised to note that the youth was nearly as tall as he was, and Isgrimner was not a small man. It was the boy's slenderness and the way he hunched when he walked that made his size less evident. "It's a pity nobody's taught that one to stand up," he thought, "and most likely he never will learn in the kitchens or wherever." When the youth had disappeared a moment later, Isgrimner bent and shook Towser, gently at first, then with increasing vigor as it became apparent that the little man was well and truly swatted. Even the firmest agitation produced only faint noises of protest. At last, Isgrimner's patience ended. He bent down, clutching one of the older man's ankles in each hand, and pulled them up in the air until Towser dangled upside down, only the crown of his bald head touching the floor. Towser's grumbling turned to gurgles of discomfort, and at last became good, understandable Westerling words. What? Down! Put down, Aiden, damn you! If you don't wake up, old souse, I shall knock your head against the ground, and until you think wine is poison forever." Isgrimner wedded word to deed, lifting the jester's ankles a few handspans, then setting his head back down, none too gently, on the cold stone. "Desist, demon, I surrender. Turn me round, man, turn me round. I'm not Usiris to hang head over heels for the instruction of the masses." Isgrimner lowered him gently until the little jester lay stretched full length on his back. "Don't add blasphemy to besottedness, old fool," Isgrimner growled. Watching Towser roll painfully onto his stomach, the Duke failed to see a slender shadow take up position in the doorway behind him. "Oh, merciful, merciful Adon," Towser groaned as he levered himself into a sitting position. "Did you have to use my head for a digging stick? If it is a well you wish to scrape, I could have told you the ground is too stony here, in the servants' chambers. Enough, Towser. I didn't wake you 2 hours before sunrise to bandy jokes. Joshua is gone." Towser rubbed his crown, searching blindly with the other hand for his wineskin. "Gone where, Isgrimner? For pity's sake, man, have you broken my pate because Joshua failed to meet you somewhere? I had nothing to do with it, I promise you." He took a long, self-pitying swig from the bag. "Idiot," Isgrimner said, but his tone was not harsh. "I mean the prince is gone. Left the Hayholt." "Impossible," said Towser firmly, recovering some of his self-possession with his second trembling swallow of Malmsey. "He is not leaving until next se'nnight. He said so. He told me I could go with him if I wished then, and be his jester at Naglement. Towser leaned his head to the side and spat. I told him I would give him my answer tomorrow. Today, I suppose now, since Elias doesn't seem to care if I stay or I go. He shook his head. And me, his father's dearest companion. Isgrimner shook his head impatiently, his gray-shot beard wagging. No, man, he is gone. Left sometime after midnight, as far as I can tell. Or so said the Erkin guardsman I found at his empty chamber when I went to keep a meeting time with him. He had asked me to come so late, though I would have rather been abed, but he said it was something that would not wait. Does that sound like a man who would leave without even a message for me? Who knows, said Towser, his wrinkled face screwed up as he pondered. Mayhap that is why he wished to speak to you, because he was leaving secretly. Then why did he not wait till I arrived? I do not like it. Isgrimner squatted down and poked at the coals with a stick lying there. There is a queer air in the halls of this house tonight. Joshua is often strange in his actions, said Towser with calm assurance. He is moody. By the Lord, he is moody. He has probably gone out to hunt owls by moonlight or some other tricksy pastime. Fear not. After a long moment of silence, Isgrimner let out a long breath. I'm sure you're right, he said, and his tone was quite nearly convincing. Even were he and Elias at open odds, nothing could ever happen here in his father's house before God and the court. Nothing but you thumping me on the head in the middle of the night. God seems to be a bit slow in doling out punishments tonight. Towser grinned a wrinkly grin. As the two men carried on their talking, voices hushed near the dull embers, Simon stole quietly back to his bed. He lay awake for some long time, wrapped in his blanket, staring up into the darkness. But by the time the cock in the courtyard below finally saw the sun's first rising glow, he had fallen back into sleep. Now, you just remember, Morganes cautioned, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a bright blue kerchief, don't eat anything until you brought it back and asked me, especially if it has red spots. Understood? Many of the articles I've asked you to gather are direst poison. Avoid stupidity if such a thing is possible. Simon, you are in charge, boy. I hold you responsible for the safety of the others. The others were Jeremias, the chandler's lad, and Isaac, a young page from the upstairs residence. The doctor had picked this hot Fayever afternoon to organize a mushroom and herb hunting expedition to the Kinswood, a small forest of less than 100 acres that huddled on the high bank of the Kinslaw along the Hayholt's western wall. Because of the drought, Morganes' supplies of important commodities had dwindled alarmingly, and the Kinswood, standing as it did beside the Great Lake, seemed a good place to search for the doctor's moisture-loving treasures. As they fanned out through the forest, Jeremias hung back, waiting until the sound of Morganes' crunching footsteps had diminished into the crackly brown undergrowth. "Have you asked him yet?" Jeremias' clothes were already so wet with perspiration that they clung. "No." Simon had squatted down to watch a press gang of ants hurrying single file up the trunk of a Vestaveg pine. "I'm going to do it today. I just have to think of the right way to do it." "What if he says no?" Jeremias eyed the procession with some distaste. "What will we do then?" "He won't say no." Simon stood up. "And if he does, well, I'll think of something." "What are you two whispering about?" Young Isaac had reappeared in the clearing. "It's not right to keep secrets." Though he was some 3 or 4 years younger than Simon and Jeremias, Isaac had already developed an upstairs tone. Simon scowled at him. "Never you mind." "We were looking at this tree," Jeremias offered, quick to feel guilt. "I should have thought," Isaac said archly, "that there were plenty of trees to look at without skulking and telling secrets." "Oh, but this one?" Jeremias began. "This one is—" "Forget the stupid tree," said Simon in disgust. "Let's go. Morganes had gotten the jump on us and will let us know if he outgathers us." He ducked a branch and waded into the ankle-high tangle of undergrowth. It was hard work. When they stopped to drink water and rest in the shade some hour and a half later, all 3 of the boys were covered in fine red dust up to their elbows and knees. Each carried a small bundle of goods wrapped in his kerchief. Simon's the largest, Isaac's and Jeremias's of more modest size. They found a large spruce which they shared as a backrest, dusty legs fanning out around it like the spokes on a wheel. Simon tossed a stone across the clearing. It thumped into a pile of broken branches, setting dead leaves a-tremble. "Why is it so hot?" moaned Jeremias, swabbing his brow. "And why is my handkerchief full of ridiculous mushrooms, so that I have to wipe the sweat away with my hands?" He held up slick, wet palms. "It's hot because it's hot," Simon grumbled. "Because there's no rain, and that's that." A longish stretch of time passed in silence. Even the insects and birds seemed to have disappeared, gone to dark places to sleep the dry, still afternoon away in silence. "I suppose we should be glad we're not at Merrimond," said Jeremias at last. "They say that 1,000 have died there from the plague." "1,000?" said Isaac, scornful. The heat had brought high color to his thin, pale face. "Thousands! It is the talk of the residents. My master goes about the hay-hole with a kerchief doused in holy water clapped to his face, and the plague has not come within 100 leagues of here." "Does your master know what is happening in Merriman?" Simon asked, interested. Isaac did have his uses. "Does he speak of it to you?" "All the time." The young page was smug. "His wife's brother is the mayor. They were among the first to flee the plague. He has gotten much news from them." "Elias made Guthwolf of Utniate the king's hand," said Simon. Jeremias groaned and slid away from the trunk, stretching out full length on the pine-needle matted ground. "That's right," Isaac replied, scratching in the dirt with a long twig. "And he has kept the plague there. It is not spread." "What caused it, this pestilence?" Simon asked. "Do any of the residence people know?" He felt stupid asking questions of a child so much younger than himself, but Isaac did hear the upstairs gossip and was not reticent in sharing it. "Nobody knows for sure. Some people say that jealous Hernister merchants from Abingate across the river poisoned the wells. Many people in Abingate have died too." Isaac said this with a certain air of satisfaction. After all, the Hernisteri were not Adonites, but heathens, however noble an ally the house of Luth might be under the High King's ward. "Others say that the drought has cracked the earth with dryness, and poisonous airs have escaped from the ground. Whatever it is, my master says that it spares nobody, rich man, priest, or peasant. You first become hot and feverish." Jeremias, on his back, groaned and mopped at his forehead. "Then you blister up like you laid on hot coals. Then the blisters begin to ooze." He emphasized this last word with a childish grimace, fine blonde hair hanging in his flushed face. "And then you die, painfully." The forest breathed heat around them as they sat without speaking. "My master, Jacob," Jeremiah said at last, "fears that the plague shall come to the hayholt on account of all the dirty peasants living by the walls." The kinswood took another slow breath. "Reuben the bear, the blacksmith, told my master that he had gotten news from a mendicant friar that Guthwolf has taken very harsh measures in Merrimund." "Harsh measures?" Simon asked, eyes closed. "Well, what does that mean?" "The friar told Reuben that Guthwolf, when he arrived in Merrimund as king's hand, took the Erkenguard and went to the homes of the sick. They took hammers, nails, and boards and sealed the houses up." "With the people inside?" Simon asked, horrified but fascinated. "Of course, to stop the spread of plague. They boarded up the houses so families of the deceased could not run away and spread the plague to others." Jeremiah raised his sleeve and mopped again. "But I thought the plague came from bad airs from the ground." "Even so, it can be spread. That is why so many priests and monks and leeches have died. Friar said that at night, for many weeks, the streets of Merrimund were, what did he say? Like the halls of hell. You could hear the people howling like dogs in the boarded up houses. Finally, when they all went silent, Guthwolf and the Erkenguard burned them, unopened." As Simon marveled at this last detail, there was a sound of breaking branches. "Ho, there, you lazy lumps!" Morganes appeared from a knot of trees, his robes festooned with twigs and leaves, a fringe of moss clinging to the brim of his wide hat. "I should have known I would find you flat on your backs." Simon struggled to his feet. "We've only been sitting a short while, Doctor," he said. "We gathered for a long time." "Don't forget to ask him," hissed Jeremiah, pulling himself up. "Well," Morganes said, eyeing their bundles critically, "I suppose you have not done badly, considering the conditions. Let me see what you found." He squatted like a farmer weeding a hedgerow and began sifting through the boys' collections. "Ah, devil's ear!" he cried, holding a scalloped mushroom up to the shaft of sunlight. "Excellent." "Doctor," Simon said, I wanted to ask you a favor." Morganes was poking through bits of fungus, using an unrolled kerchief as a table. "Well, Jeremiah is interested in joining the guards, or trying to. The problem is Count Bragar knows us castlefolk hardly at all, and Jeremiah has no connection into such circles." "That," said Morganes dryly, "is no surprise." He emptied out the next handkerchief. "Do you think you could write him a letter of introduction? You are well known to all." Simon tried to keep his voice calm. Isaac looked at sweating Jeremiah with a mixture of respect and amusement. The doctor's tone was neutral. "I suspect I am only too well known to Bragar and his friends." He looked up, fixing Jeremiah with a sharp eye. "Does Jacob know?" He knows my feelings," stammered Jeremiah. Morganes bundled all the gatherings together in a sack and returned the boys' kerchiefs. The doctor stood, shaking the clinging leaves and tree needles from his robe. "I suppose I could," he said as they started back toward the hayholt. "I don't think I approve, and I don't think a note from me will quite bring them to respectful attention. But I suppose if Jacob knows, then it's all right." They waded single file through the scratching thicket. "Thank you, Doctor," said Jeremiah breathlessly, struggling to keep up. I doubt they shall want you. Isaac sounded a little envious. As they moved closer to the castle, his haughtiness seemed to return apace. Dr. Morganes, Simon said, mustering as best he could a tone of benign unconcern, why don't I write the letter, and then you can look at it and sign it? It would be good practice for me, don't you think? Why, Simon, the doctor said, stepping over a fallen tree trunk, that's an excellent idea. I'm glad to see you take such initiative. Maybe I will make a true apprentice of you yet. The doctor's cheerful statement, his tone of pride, weighed Simon down like a cape of lead. He hadn't done anything yet, let alone anything bad, and already he felt like a murderer or some worse thing. He was about to say something else when the stifling forest air was ripped by a scream. Simon turned around to see Jeremias, his face white as wheat paste, pointing at something in a thicket beside the fallen log. Isaac stood beside him, frozen in shock. Simon hurried back, Morganes only a step behind him. It was a corpse, lying tumbled half in and half out of the thicket. Although the face was mostly covered by bushes, the near fleshless state of the exposed parts showed that the body had been dead for some time. "Oh, oh, oh," gasped Jeremias. "He's dead. Are there outlaws here? What shall we do?" "Oh, hush," snapped Morganes. "That will be a start. Let me have a look." The doctor picked up the hem of his robe and waded forward into the thicket, then stopped and gingerly lifted the branches that masked much of the body. From the tendrils of beard that still clung to his bird and insect-gnawed face, he seemed to have been a northerner, a rimmersman, perhaps. He wore unremarkable traveling clothes, a light wool cloak and tanned leather boots, rotting now so that bits of the fur lining showed through. "How did he die?" asked Simon. The eyeless sockets, dark and secretive, unnerved him. The toothy mouth, flesh shrunken and pulled away, seemed to be grinning, as though the cadaver had been lying here for weeks, enjoying a bleak joke. Morganes used a stick to pull the tunic aside. A few flies rose lazily and circled. "Look," he said. From a puckered hole in the corpse's desiccated trunk rose the stump of an arrow, broken off a hand's breadth above the ribs. "Done by someone in a hurry, perhaps? Someone who did not want their arrow recognized." They had to wait for a moment for Isaac to finish being noisily ill before they could hurry on to the castle. Okay, so we are now going to start Chapter 9, Smoke on the Wind, because we've got about 7 minutes left, so. Chapter 9. Can you guess? Smoke on the Wind. Did you get it? Did he guess? Still pale for all his hours in the sun, Jeremias bobbed along at Simon's side, like the sheep's bladder float on a fisherman's net. "I've got it," Simon growled. Jeremias's agitation irritated him. It seemed out of keeping with the masculine gravity of their mission. "You think too much." Jeremias took no offense. "As long as you've got it," he said. Main Row, open to the harsh noontide sky, tent roofing skinned back, was nearly deserted. Here and there the constabulary guard, yellow liveried to show their immediate allegiance to Count Breugar, bearing sashes of Elias's royal green, lounged in the doorways or diced with one another against the walls of shuttered shops. Even though the morning market was long over, still it seemed to Simon that there were fewer common people in the streets than was usual. Those to be seen were mostly the homeless who had been flooding into Irchester in the recent winter months, driven out of the countryside by drying streams and failing wells. They stood or sat in the shadows of stone walls and buildings, knots of indifference, their movements slow and purposeless. The constables pushed past or stepped over them as though they were dogs in the street. The pair turned right off of Main Row onto Tavern Way, the largest of the thoroughfares running perpendicular to the row. Here there was more activity, although still the largest number of folk in sight were soldiers. The heat had driven most of them indoors. They leaned out of the low windows with flagons in their hands, watching Simon and Jeremias and the half a dozen or so other pedestrians with beery disinterest. A peasant girl in a homespun skirt, some ostler's daughter most likely by the jug she balanced on her shoulder, hurried past up the street. A few soldiers whistled and called out to her, spilling great sloshes of beer into the dust below the tavern windowsills. The girl did not look up as she trotted by, chin on chest. Her haste, combined with the heavy jug, kept her steps short. Simon watched the fluid sway of her hips appreciatively, even turning completely around to keep her in view until she swooped abruptly into an alleyway and disappeared. "Simon, come on," Jeremias called. "There it is." In the middle of the block of buildings, standing up from Tavern Row like a rock in a rutted road, stood St. Sutrin's Cathedral. The stone of its great face dully reflected the patient sun. Its tall arches and vaulting buttresses cast thin shadows over the nests of gargoyles, whose lively, twisted faces peered down happily, cackling and joking over the shoulders of the humorless saints. 3 limp pennants hung from the flagpole over the high double doors. Elias's green dragon, the pillar and tree of the church, and at the bottom the gold coronet of Urchester town on a white field. A pair of constabulary guards leaned on the open doors, their pikes point down in the wide stone doorway. "Well, here's for it," said Simon grimly, and with Jeremias trotting at his heels, he made his way up the 24 marble steps. At the top, one of the guards lifted his pike lazily and barred their entrance. His chainmail hood was pulled back, hanging like a veil across his shoulders. "What do you want, then?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "A message for Breugar." Simon was embarrassed to hear his voice break. "For Count Breugar, from Dr. Morganes at the Hayholt." A little defiantly, he thrust out the rolled parchment. The guardsman who had spoken took it and gave the seal a cursory glance. The other was staring intently up at the carved door lintel, as if hoping to see written there his dismissal from duty for the day. The first guard handed the parchment back with a shrug. "Inside, to the left. Don't be scamping about." Simon drew himself up to his full height, indignant. When he was a guardsman, he would carry himself with a great deal more style than these bored, unshaven idiots. Didn't they know what an honor it was to wear the king's green? He and Jeremias climbed past them into St. Sutrin's cool interior. Nothing moved in the antechamber, not even the air, but Simon could see the play of light on figures in motion beyond the far doorway. Instead of going directly to the door on the left, he looked back to see if the guards were watching. They weren't, of course, then strode forward to look into the cathedral's grand chapel. "Simon!" Jeremias hissed, alarmed. "What are you doing? They said over there." He pointed to the leftmost doorway. Ignoring his companion, Simon leaned his head through the doorway. Jeremiah, muttering nervously, came up behind. "It's like one of those religious pictures," Simon thought. "When you see Osiris and the tree way in the back, and the faces of Nubani peasants and all very close up front." Indeed, the chapel was so large and high-ceilinged that it seemed a whole world. By the way, I should just mention, I'll probably go about a minute and a half or so beyond the top of the hour, just because I'm almost done with the section, so I'm going to get to the ending. Inside, the chapel was so large and high-ceilinged that it seemed a whole world. Sunlight, softened by the colored windows as though by clouds, streamed down from the uppermost reaches. White-robed priests moved around the altar, cleaning and polishing like shaven-headed chambermaids. Simon supposed they were preparing for the Elysiamansa services only a week or two away. Closer to the door, moving equally busily but with no other common reference, Breugar's yellow-tunicked constables milled back and forth on various errands, dotted here and there with the green of one of the castle's Erkenguard or the dun and black clothes of some Urchester notable. The two groups seemed completely separated. It took a moment for Simon to see the row of boards and stools that had been mounted between the front and back of the cathedral. In a flash of insight, Simon realized that it was not a fence to keep the scurrying priests in, as was the first impression. No, rather, it was to keep the soldiers out. It seemed that Bishop Demidus and the priests had still not given up hope that the Lord Constable's occupation of their cathedral would be less than permanent. As they climbed the stairs, they had to show their parchment to 3 more guards in turn, all of these more alert than those at the massive front door, either because they were inside out of the sun, or else due to their increased proximity to the object of protection. At last they stood in a crowded guardroom before a seam-faced, gap-toothed veteran whose belt full of keys and air of harried disinterest bespoke authority. "Yes, the Lord Breugar's here today. Give me the letter and I'll be passing it on." The sergeant scratched his chin impassively. "No, sir, we must give it to him. It's from Dr. Morganes." Simon tried to sound firm. Jeremias was staring at the floor. "Oh, is it then? Well, think of that." The man spat on the sawdust-covered floor. Here and there the gleam of marble tiles showed through. "Done bite me? What a day. Wait here, then." "So, what have we here?" Count Breugar, sitting at the table beside the bony remnants of a meal of small birds, raised an eyebrow. He had delicate features, nearly lost in jowly flesh, and the hands of a musician, fine, long-fingered hands. "A letter, my lord." Simon on one knee extended the tube of parchment. "Well, give it to me then, boy. Can't you see I'm at dinner?" The Count's voice was high-pitched and effeminate, but Simon had heard that Breugar was a terrifying swordsman. Those slender hands had killed many men. As the Count read the message, lips moving, shiny with grease, Simon tried to keep his shoulders straight and his back stiff as a pike handle. Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw the grizzled sergeant looking at him, so he tilted his chin back and stared straight ahead, thinking about what a favorable comparison he must make to the slouching dullards on watch at the cathedral doors. "Please consider the bearers for service under your lordship's guidance," Breugar read aloud. His emphasis gave Simon a panicky moment. Had he noticed the S Simon had added to bearer? He had made it a bit squeezy so it would fit. Count Breugar, his eyes on Simon, handed the letter to the staff sergeant. As the sergeant read, slower even than Breugar, the nobleman looked the youth up and down, then flicked a brief glance to the still kneeling Jeremias. When the sergeant handed the letter back, he wore a smile that showed 2 teeth missing and a pink tongue probing in the dark gulf. "So," Breugar floated the sound like a sorrowful breath, "Morganes, the old apothecary, wants me to take on a couple of castle mice and turn them into men." He picked up a tiny haunch from his plate and chewed on the bone. "Impossible." Simon felt his knees buckle and his stomach push up toward his throat. But why?" he stammered. "Because I don't need you. I have fighting men enough. I can't afford you. No one can plant if it doesn't rain, and I have men lined up already looking for a job of work that will feed them. But, most important, I don't want you. A couple of suet-soft castle boys who have felt nothing more painful in their lives than a smack on their pink arses for stealing cherries. Go on with you. If war comes, if those sneering heathen in Hanistia continue to resist the king's will, or treacherous Josua turns up, then you can carry a pitchfork or scythe with the rest of the peasants. Maybe you can even follow the army and water the horses if manpower gets short enough. But you'll never be soldiers. The king didn't make me Lord Constable to nursemaid groundlings. Sergeant, show these castle mice a hole to scamper out. Neither Simon nor Jeremiah said a word all the long journey back to the hayhold. When Simon was alone in his curtained alcove, he broke his barrel-stave sword over his knee. He did not cry. He would not cry. And that's where we are going to stop. Whoa, I ran over a bit more than I'd expected to. Anyway, so lovely to spend time with all of you. I'll make this a quick wrap-up. I will be back tomorrow or later today, depending on how you're measuring your time. For those of you who might want to join me tomorrow or later today, be aware I'm doing it at 6 p.m., not 7 p.m. It's a one-time only thing, but it's the only chance we can get to do something. It will require me to be able to leave here a little after 7. So that's what's going on. I'll be reading from that section there starting tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Until that point, or until when I next see you guys, which will be, I guess, next Sunday morning, early Sunday morning, whatever the case may be. Thank you so much for joining me. Be good to yourselves, be good to your friends and loved ones, cherish them, help them, and we will all continue on through this world together, and eventually we'll make it work. All right, thank you very much. Be well. Peace. Good night.